In this video, I'm going to show you how to change out your Solar P1 stock tires for hybrid road tires without ever having to use a set of these at all. Let's check it out. Hey guys, it's Steve from Scooter King, and we're taking a break from some of our other channels, and we're doing videos on one of my other passions, which is electric scooters. So I'm not just an audio enthusiast, I'm also a scooter enthusiast, and I love it. And one of the hardest things there is to do on a scooter is change a tire. You're gonna get a flat. You're gonna. Just wrap your head around that now. It's a lot easier to deal with if you just know ahead of time you're gonna get a flat and you're gonna have to change it. And I've done it a bunch of different ways. I've done it with these. These are really nice. They're long enough to actually have some leverage. That's all great and everything, but they will mar up the inside of the rim. They just will. And most rims are aluminum, so they're super easy to damage. Even if you use protectors like these that come in the packages and stuff, what you're going to find, like I did, is that for one, they're way too big, and even if you cut them down, it's still taking up a bunch of valuable real estate because you barely have enough room to get the tire on the rim under the best of conditions. So instead of dealing with all of that, let's actually go through the process of taking the tire on and off without ever having to use these guys in the first place. First up is to get the scooter up off the ground on crates or boxes so that the rear and front tires can spin, and then make note of the washers on both the front and back. The amount of washers is different for each side, and you'll need to remove the deck to expose the wiring. After that, the front and rear motors can be disconnected. While it's possible to change the tires without actually removing the wiring, it's a lot harder. You're not going to have nearly as much play in both the rear or front motor cables to really manipulate the tire. There's a lot more play in the front motor wire once you untape it than there is in the rear, but the rear motor is much easier to disconnect. In addition, for some almost unexplainable reason, Solar has decided to route both the brake cable and the front motor wire through a hole, an access hole in the front forks on the right-hand side. So in addition to increasing wear and tear on the cable, it forces you to rewire the end of the cable under the deck for the front motor in order to change out the tire if you want to remove the tire completely. The three major power wires disconnect easily and will fit through the hole, but the control harness and bracket won't. So if you want to remove the front tire and wire motor completely, this forces you to pull out these little connectors out of the wiring harness so that you can fish it through that access hole, and then you've got to put them back in the wiring harness. It's doable, it doesn't require a soldering iron, and it takes a steady hand, but if this is your first time working on your scooter, I'd suggest leaving the front wire motor attached. The rear motor wire and harness is much easier to get to and doesn't have to go through any obstruction, so I'd start there. You also need to remove the front and back disc brake rotors as well, just because it makes removing the tire a lot easier, but it also keeps you from accidentally damaging the disc rotors themselves. Once the tire's off the scooter, it's a little easier to work on, and you're going to want to keep the axle down and the motor wire up, just to keep from accidentally crimping the motor wire or manipulating it more than you need to. Then we're going to deflate the tire completely by pressing inside the tire stem, and when you do that and the tire's completely flat, press the tire off of the bead completely from the top and the bottom of the rim so that the tire's completely detached from the bead. And then we're going to use just a standard pair of regular channel locks. We're going to use these to compress the tire, and then we're going to take a hand clamp and we're going to clamp that in place once the channel locks have correctly compressed the tire. These are super easy to find. Walmart, Harbor Freight, or Home Depot has these, and they're fairly inexpensive. Getting the tires off the rims is actually pretty easy to do, especially if they're warm, even without pry bars. Once the clamps are on the tire and the tire's totally compressed off the beads, there's quite a bit of space, and the tire's pretty easy to remove. You can pull it off almost completely with your hands. This can be a pretty messy process, especially if you have slime or sand still inside the tire. So once you dump that out, you're going to want to clean the rim completely. And since the rim is aluminum, this is why pry bars are such a bad idea, because they'll mar up and pit or ding the bead of the rim itself. So here we're just using a plastic stiff brush to get the rest of the debris off, and then we're going to take a rag and some WD-40 and clean the rest of the sealant completely off of the rim, because the bead part of the rim is really where the tire seal takes place. So if you've mortar pitted those up with pry bars, you're going to have problems getting a solid seal with your tire. The original stock tires are actually pretty soft and thin to begin with, and our new tires have a directional marking, just like our stock tires did, that we need to be aware of. So make sure that when you put these on the rim, you're putting them on going the correct direction, and the direction marker is right on the side of the tire. Now that we've completely cleaned the rim and lubricated it with a bit of WD-40, the first bead of the tire is always the easiest to put on because you have access to the entire depth of the rim itself to do it. You can literally just push it on with your hand. The second or last bead of the tire, once the first one's on, is always the most challenging. We're going to use the exact same clamping process that we used to take the tire off the rim. These tires are a bit thicker and stiffer, so it takes a bit more to grab hold of them, but the same process applies. Once they're compressed with the channel locks, then we simply slide the hand clamps over in place to hold that for the time being. Now we're going to repeat that same process 2 more times, and we're going to continue to put clamps on about 3 to 4 inches apart from one another until we get 3 total clamps on the tire. And what we're doing is we're compressing the bead enough to where we can get the bead to slip down between the rim itself and create more space, just like we had when we pressed the first bead of the tire onto the rim. Now that we have all 3 clamps on, we're going to stop and do something super important here. We're going to lube the bead one more time. And we're going to actually be using a silicone spray. It's made by WD-40, but this is safe for rubber, and it's super important that it be safe for rubber. You don't want to use a lubrication that's going to seep into the tire that might damage the bead or the rubber of the tire. And you also don't want to put so much in that it seeps into the electrical part of the motor. So if you just slosh a bunch of soapy water around the rim, then you risk getting that into the actual motor itself and then causing rust and damage and other things. So the part where we lube the tire for the last bead is maybe the most important, because this is what helps it slip over the rim once the bead is centered in the bottom channel of the rim and creates the space on the top. It's important that we lube both the tire itself on the inside and outside and the rim itself. And once we do that, we can work the tire around the rim and literally push it as we go until it pops over the last bead or top of the rim itself, and that our tire is completely seated onto the rim. Now we can pull the clamps off and we're ready to inflate the tire. The last step in this process is to actually apply a tire strap around the tire diameter. And this isn't always necessary. Some tires just pop right on. But if you have difficulty getting the bead to seat, this can be helpful. So we're just going to put the strap around the tire. We're going to cinch it up, and then we're going to inflate the tire, and that will help the bead pop onto the rim. From here, as we start to inflate the tire, we can see as the air fills the rim that the beads simply pop on because we've lubricated them front and back, so we can remove the tire strap itself before the tire gets completely inflated. And then from here, we're ready to check that both beads on both sides of the tire are correctly popped into place and sealed, and then we can inflate the rest of the way. And the final step in this whole process is to balance the tire. If you ride at fairly high speeds, and the Solar P-Series scooters can go 40 miles an hour and maybe even more than that, it's definitely crucial. So here we have a little tiny bit of an out of round tire. You can tell by the rim is dead on, but the tire itself is just a hair out of round, so we have a little bit of a shimmy. So we're going to find the part that's the most amount of vibration, and then we're going to set our cruise control so that the tire will spin freely, and we're going to take a rasp or coarse file, and we're going to put it up against the tire only enough to actually come in contact with the out of round part, but not the rest of the tire. This is a fairly common process, especially for inexpensive tires that do tend to be out of round from time to time. And it may not be something you even notice at lower speeds, but if you travel at higher speeds, it's something you're going to come in contact with. And as you can see, it doesn't take much. And with that, we have a nice shimmy-free tire that's now trimmed to round. Now with our new tires mounted, balanced, and tuned for high speeds, we've had several hundred miles to audition these, and they're great at cornering, super stable. Hey, thanks for hanging out, guys. If you learned something or if this was helpful in any way, please hit the subscription and notification bells. The channel's just getting started, so it really helps. So get outside, have fun, ride safe. We'll catch you in the next video.